All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Zimmerman, and this is my review of Plural Eldership for Systematic Theology 2 for Urshan Graduate School of Theology for the spring 2018 semester. A quick disclaimer before I get too far into this video. The thoughts, views, and opinions in this video presentation do not entirely capture the views of the presenter or any of his affiliated organizations. The products and methods described have not been evaluated by the FDA to treat, heal, or cure any medical condition. If symptoms persist, please see Dr. Norris or any of our plethora of wonderful professors and guest lecturers for this semester for treatment and continued prayer. Thank you. All right, so today I'm going to be talking to you all about plural eldership. I'm going to be heavy referencing and utilizing our class text for this, Who Runs the Church. And this section that I'm going to be reading from is contributed by Samuel Waldron. So when you look at the idea of plural eldership, the first thing that you're going to want to look at is who uses it? Why does it exist? Why does it matter? Historically, it's seen heavily used in the Reformed or Puritan church government. And actually, when researching this, there's very little recent academic work that relates to this specific topic. In fact, when I researched this in several academic databases, I was only able to find one or maybe two articles. And for the most part, those were articles that referenced a book rather than actual publication. However, Google, as always, had a plethora of knowledge and information. So I'm going to be utilizing our text, some of those articles that I was able to identify, as well as biblical scripture to identify my point in argumentation as to why plural eldership is effective and why everyone should use and love it. We can see some form of plural eldership and leadership in many denominations throughout the Christian faith today. And as Waldron identifies, and as I agree with him, that is not always plural eldership in actuality. They may say that it's plural eldership, but there is a large spectrum of this that I'll get into later that may differentiate from what we're actually talking about when we mention plural eldership. And another disclaimer, and just due to the fact that I had a flag set available, so I'm going to use this. I have the Christian flag on my one side and the American flag on my other side. And when you look at these flags, for us in today's world, in our modernistic society, in our current viewpoint, it is easy for us, and in fact, it is regular for us to associate and make known this difference of the separation between state and the separation of church. It is a human right that there's a difference between those two organizations. The problem that this gets into, especially when we're looking at the early apostolic church as well as just in general human history, is the fact that this is a relatively very new concept, that throughout human history, whatever religious organization or whatever government organization would happen to take power would control all facets of the society for the people that were living under their rule. So whatever the king's religion was, that was your religion. And we see this particularly within the Roman Empire, is the argumentation that is used most primarily for this, that if you look at the Roman Empire and the way that when Constantine introduced the Christian faith as the religion of the Roman Empire, that it caused a fact that the Roman Empire could not exist without its pagan gods and rituals, that it was so influenced into the government system that introducing Christianity helped aid and assist in the collapse of the Roman Empire. And when you see this depart from plural eldership as described in the Bible and through the early apostolic church documents. And you see it being influenced by this Roman Empire, by these pagan doctrines and theologies that influenced into the early Christian church, in part because there was no other organization or entity that could take command. And that's when you get into the influence of human effects. So you see that negative effect on what should be developed as regular church governance. And you see that too when you have the idea of why we use plural eldership. And looking at the biblical examples that I'll go over here shortly, we see that there is no direct reference to a church in the New Testament as having only one elder. Now, not all churches had elders and deacons, and it was emphasized in Titus that you can have a church with elders, but you don't necessarily have deacons. You may have a new church that doesn't have that buildup of individuals. So you may start off with only elders, but the ideal is to eventually add deacons in as you move along. So plural eldership also helps to mitigate corruption. At the same time, it provides a system that many people feel comfortable with. Now, when you look at this, I have to mention that any of these models of church governance here on earth are going to have flaws. They're going to have corruption at some level, regardless of whether it's not the person at the church chili supper that takes the extra chili home with them instead of donating it to the homeless, or whether it's a international church group that's embezzling money from a charitable organization. That's going to happen because we live in a sinful, corrupt world. So none of these systems, even plural eldership, is going to be foolproof. But plural eldership helps us get to a point where we can mitigate that corruption and get it to a point where it is not being so disruptive to the church body. And the argumentation that I would further go on with here is that churches of the New Testament are not connected, that they are interdependent, still sharing similar core values, yet going about day-to-day operations in different fashions based on the area in which they're operating. And as you go through, if you look at the modern era, you see this with many international church organizations. For example, the United Pentecostal Church International, where we have different operating bodies and groups in different nations throughout the world. They all prescribe to the same articles of faith, but those can be changed, and each nation can ratify and make amends to their own personal statements, not necessarily changing doctrine or scripture, but they can change things such as religious holidays or things like that. So you see that interacting throughout all of church history, from the early apostolic churches that were separated just by sheer distance and the inability to effectively communicate due to technology limitations, versus people that have international capabilities to do a voice or a video conference and just talk to someone almost instantaneously and almost automatically get that feedback from the other individual that you're conversing with. So you see that it's a big spread of difference, but it still can get boiled down to that same basic principle. Now, while I'm talking about this, it's also important to note that plural eldership can exist on a spectrum. So on one end of this, you have a very strict two-office view of elders and deacons, and that all elders are equal and all deacons are equal. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you get to a three-office approach, and this is something that has become popularized in recent generations, where you have a teaching elder, which is commonly referred to as a pastor or a minister, the senior pastor of the church, what have you. Then you have a group of ruling elders, and then you have your group of deacons. Now, to see both of these in effect is going to change based on where you are, what your church organization looks like, and what resources and capabilities that the individual church might have. So when I'm looking at this and I see, well, when did plural eldership start? So church governments has greatly changed, taken on different roles and forms according to different people's interpretation of Scripture. And so it becomes a challenge to put an exact date on when one system might start and how it's replacing other systems. And when you see this spectrum, like I just mentioned, it becomes challenging to look back and see what effects it might have on this as you see a time period and you can't put a hard date on it. But with plural eldership, we do see it mentioned and referenced through Scripture. Then you see it referenced and mentioned in early apostolic church documents that have been recovered up to about approximately the year 150 AD, depending on who you talk to. But just for this sake of argumentation, I'm going to use 150 AD. And then looking forward, you see plural eldership start to reemerge with the Protestant and Purist Reformations and the effect on that around the 15th, 16th century. And you see that influenced in different writings, early Baptist conventions, early writings, John Calvin, different people like that, those early Protestant reformers who had this idea that brought it up. And you see that affecting church governance up until today. And so what does plural elder congregation look like? What does it mean? So this is basically boiled down to 4 quick principles. So you have a Puritan component, which in a nutshell, and I'm just going to use a scripture reference here, Deuteronomy 12:32. Whatever I command you, you shall be careful to do. You shall not add or take away from it. And this is just the idea that God does regulate the governments of his church, that it's not just you can go do whatever you want as long as you listen to the Bible, when if you're listening to the Bible, you see these scriptures and these references laid out, that these are the positions you need to have. Then it moves on to an independent clause. Now it's important here to note that this does not mean that there is no universal church government, but it does give each local church the given authority to order its worship and discipline. So to put in place different rules and parameters that will work best for that congregation where it's at, where you don't have to refer to an international body for everything. You're still recognizing the fact that there are other churches. It's not like this one church is going to be saved and every other building is going to hell. That's not what we're trying to get at here. We're trying to get at the fact that these churches have independent authority to work almost interdependently of each other, yet still will pertain to a fixed doctrine and respect for the authority of the Bible. Now, it's also clear that these are going to have a democratic componency to them. Now, democratic is it's a term that has greatly changed over the centuries and still is different depending upon what country you happen to live in. So, but it's still the best cover word, and simply for this, it means that the church body has the ability to both elect and the ability to, perhaps more importantly, to remove leadership. And you see this affecting and minimizing corruption, and pastors or elders rather, that may have taken a different turn or a different approach, that they can be removed if they need to be. That is not a lifetime appointment. And then you also have plural elder principles, which for the sake of time, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's more than one, and can refer back to the spectrum that's mentioned earlier, that this can take on different approaches as well. And just a couple different scriptures excuse me, that I want to approach really quickly here, and I'm going to add a link to all of these so you can review them all for yourself. But two that I want to really get to quick are Acts 14:23. And when they had ordained them elders in every church and had prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord, on whom they believed. And then Titus 1:5. For this cause I left thee in Crete, that thou shouldest set in order the things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city, as I had appointed thee. Now it's important to get across the point here very quickly that in both of these references, that there are pluralized elders as well as pluralized cities. So that it's going to be in every church, in every city, that you have these elders, and they're going to be functioning in different ways and different levels based upon where they're at and what their resources and abilities are. And then I have a big list of scriptures that go through examples of the plurality of eldership all throughout the New Testament. And so we see that when we're talking about plural eldership, it's important to remember and notate the facts that it is going to be based on the scriptural references, and as well as looking at the church today and how the church body will function, and that it gives that church, the independent congregation, the ability to elect and make changes that best suit themselves, but then at the same time, they also are referencing to a larger church, a larger universal church concept. So thank you very much for your time. Hope you all have a blessed and wonderful day, and I look forward to watching all of your video presentations as well. Thank you.